Hey, howdy, and a big welcome back to Clem Hawks, folks. I'm Yak, ready to take you through today's edition of Minnesota Wild discussion here on the channel because my man Clem had that Minnesota Twins discussion, and I don't think I can top that. Sorry about the cat hair. The cat literally just came up here and clobbered me with cat hair prior to coming on the video. Sometimes animals do stupid stuff, but friends, talk about the Minnesota Wild and the stupid stuff they could do this year. Well, obviously you got an MVP caliber candidate on your team in Kirill Kaprizov that could definitely make a huge impact this year. Marc-Andre Fleury in net. The defense looking pretty decent. Things are looking tight for the Minnesota Wild this season. You saw the title of the video though, and we are going to discuss quite heavily all about it in just a moment. But if you're new to the channel, what I want you to do, folks, Clem's got the Twins, I've got the Wild. We're covering some stuff all over the place when we have time, whether it be in the MLB or NHL. If you want to take the next 5-10 minutes to consider subscribing, that would be greatly appreciated from us folks here on Clem Hawks. I can't talk. It is 9 o'clock at night. It's bedtime. Anyway, folks, the Minnesota Wild. The question being, will they make the playoffs this year? That's the problem for the Minnesota Wild, right? They got in this year, but didn't have the result we were hoping for. However, you look at the Minnesota Wild's roster this year, and you kind of go over there. They're in that Central Division, which seems to every year be a crapshoot of how things go. And with another $4 million in cap space still available, everybody's re-signed. You can still go out there and add to this roster, but you got Kaprizov, Zuccarello, Eriksson Ek, Foligno, Greenway, Jost, Hartman, Frederick Gaudreau, Matthew Boldy, Connor Dewar, and Brandon Duhaime. Those are all players on your forward roster. You got Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, Matt Dumba, Jacob Middleton, Dmitry Kulikov, Alex Goligoski, and John Merrill, all on the D-core. You got Marc-Andre Fleury, the clear starter, looking to win now. And then what else do you got going on? Well, on the roster, you got Liam Ogren, Vladislav Firstov, Adam Beckman, Marco Rossi, right? Sam Henkins, Samuel Walker, who just signed the new contract, Pavel Novak, right? Those are guys that are pretty much going to be difference makers for you. And then there's a couple other guys, depth pieces in there. On the defense, Carson Lambos, Ryan O'Rourke, two guys who just won gold medals with Team Canada, Damon Hunt, Kalen Addison, Joe Hicketts, Andre Schuster's down there in the minors if you need them. Like, this roster is built to win hockey games, but the question is, how many hockey games are they built to win? And I mean, Kaprizov in himself, just like a Connor McDavid, just like a Johnny Gaudreau in Columbus, just like an Austin Matthews in Toronto, can haul a dead horse team into 8th place in the conference, no problem. But you know what? End of the day is, how much do the other guys impact this roster in making the playoffs, right? If you have one guy that can drag you to the Stanley Cup playoffs, that's great, but what happens to him if he gets injured? What happens to him X, Y, and Z? And that's the scary part for this Minnesota Wild team, I think, especially, is, you know what, if things aren't going south, the sell-off's going to happen at the trade deadline pretty quick. This is a moment in this team's kind of history where Bill Guerin's going to have to really make a big time decision come trade deadline time, because there's some assets in the cupboard. Do you sell them off to get the pieces you want to go deep into the playoffs with, or do you want to go and things aren't going well, you're 4 or 5 points out of the playoffs and you have that feeling, you've got your star injured, you're trending down. I really don't know. And this is one of those things. This is the precarious situation for the Minnesota Wild. I look at the roster and it's very good enough to make the playoffs, but it's 1 or 2 injuries severe to a player away from not being able to make the playoffs. And that's kind of where this gets fun, right? Will the Minnesota Wild make the playoffs? This roster will, 100%, unless. And that's the scary part. You don't want to be one of those teams in the NHL that we will make the playoffs unless. And the Oilers, as an Oilers fan, you know what? I know what that feels like. We've been there a lot of years, and unfortunately, it usually doesn't turn out, right? If you're one of those teams that says, we're going to be in the playoffs unless, you usually aren't in the playoffs. So for the Minnesota Wild right now, I guess the big thing I'd be looking for as a guy that's going to be following him this year, just simply put, how much do you maximize that $4.5 million in salary cap space to turn this roster from that borderline bubble team that should be 5, 6, 7, 8 in the Western Conference? Obviously, the divisions don't line up quite that way, but you get where I'm going, right? You're lining up 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, okay, if you are somewhere in the bottom half of the 8 teams that make the playoffs in your conference, where are you? Are you the team that squeaks in? Are you the team that's just in a few games ahead of deadline? Are you the team that's been there all year, solidly slipped down? Or are you the team that, you know what, middle of the pack? Middle of the pack surprised me in the playoffs. That's what 5, 6, 7, 8 means in reverse order, going 8, 7, 6, 5. And friends, that's where I really see the Minnesota Wild. They could be anywhere from good, 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 good enough to make the playoffs without question, to just good enough to make the playoffs, to guess what? They did not make the playoffs. And that's where this gets really painstaking for Minnesota Wild fans. That's end of the day. That's all I've got on this one. It is a question that you're teetering on a bubble. If the bubble pops, guess what? You're not making the playoffs. And that's as simple as losing a guy like Matt Dumba for half the season and losing Kirill Kaprizov for 20 games. That's how much this season could hinge on things. Or, and here's the wildest thing about the Wild, is if you lose Marc-Andre Fleury for a substantial amount of time this year, you're running Philip Gustafsson and Jesper Wallstedt. That's your goaltending duo. And I love Wallstedt, right? Like, I obviously was fine that the Oilers drafted Xavier Bourgault, but let me tell you, I am pretty still high on Jesper Wallstedt. And end of the day, in that department, my friends, if you're relying on him, it's not a knock against him, but you can't count on a kid to give you Marc-Andre Fleury level goaltending. Now, here's the other flip side of that goaltending coin, is what happens if Fleury is just an absolute nightmare in net? What if you get, even though you're a much better team than Chicago was last year, what if you get Chicago Marc-Andre Fleury in net? Oh, no. You can have Kirill Kaprizov doing whatever the heck he wants to do, and guess what? You're still not making the playoffs. So, sorry, I just had to kill a spider, but I can keep talking through it. But yeah, end of the day, right? If you do not get the goaltending, that's going to sink you faster than an injury, faster than an underperforming forward group, over leaking defensive group. That's all going to sink you a lot faster than any of that. Goaltending is number one, but obviously number one to goaltending is injuries. Folks, I'm Yak. This is Clem Hawks. Do you see the Minnesota Wild making the playoffs? Do I make any valid points? Am I a complete crank that should stick to the Edmonton Oilers, for crying out loud? You let me know in that comments section down below. I hope you took the past 7 minutes to consider subscribing. I give you that 5-10 window. I never know how long I'm going to talk. I ad-lib these dang things, dude. I don't have a script. I don't have a plan. I just come up here and wail away at saying words for 7, 8 to 10, 12 minutes and see what happens. So, folks, if you think I'm an idiot, if you think I'm a genius, let me know in the comments section below. I am up on to here.